The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is Bambi from Conservation International. And today we're so happy that you were able to join us. And we're going to go through a little bit of what we went through at the All Partner meeting last week in Atlanta, alongside of the National Coffee Association annual convention. We had great participation in the meetings from partners and non-partners who are very interested in learning more about the challenge. And we're going to try and recap very quickly, 1.5 days of meetings in about 60 minutes. So we'll go through things relatively quickly. We will record this for those of your colleagues who aren't able to join us today, and we'll put that up on the website as well. And then we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. But if you have questions and we don't get to them, please feel free to email us with those or suggestions, and we will respond. So with that, what we're going to cover today is a little bit of like the framing of the meeting was really around the time is now, and we know that the coffee markets are quite volatile right now. Prices are really low, and so we had a relatively long session on the role of the challenge and the role of sustainability in supporting farmers and during a volatile coffee market. We'll share with you some of our thinking on that and some of the thinking that came out of those sessions. And then we'll go into the year in review, just recapping kind of how we've grown, how participation is looking like, some of our communications highlights. We'll also have Valerie will present on the first draft of the annual Commitments Hub report. So we are looking at the Commitments Hub and trying to distill what is that telling us about what we're doing in coffee. And we'll present out to you kind of what that looks like and how, if you haven't made your commitment or if you haven't reported on your commitment, you still have time to do so before we publish that. Niels from our team will also talk about what it means to be a partner. One of the things that we've been doing with the Advisory Council is looking at how active are our partners and how do we reactivate them if they go a little dormant. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll go into the collective action networks and the milestones that they've achieved in the past year and the next steps. So we'll have, Parker from Fairtrade USA talk about the sourcing network. Raina will talk about the R&R network. And then I'll talk about the labor and the forest and coffee mapping network. And we'll finish off with an overview of what our 2019 calendar looks like and what our plan is. And then finally, the opportunities to meet up at SCA in Boston this year, next month. And just a special thank you to Finance in Motion, Rainforest Alliance, and Solidaridad for sponsoring the All Partner meeting. And then we also had a number of partners bring coffee to the meeting, so our coffee breaks could be quite delicious as well. So just thank you to everyone who made that meeting so successful. And like I said, everybody's active participation also made it quite a success, and we've heard tremendous feedback on the meeting already. So as you'll recall, we are working to do this ambitious goal, and we call it a challenge because it is challenging, of making coffee the world's first sustainable agricultural product. And we believe that if partners understand and have opportunities and incentives to act, they will act. And that will lead to new commitments, additional investments. Usually people start by making individual actions and commitments in terms of my organization or my company. And then we're trying to figure out is how do you leverage those individual actions to scale them up and drive collaboration among like-minded actors to really get to scale and drive impacts at scale. And where we are in the challenge in our 4th year now is really in that third circle where we are trying to move from providing information and tools and trying to catalog existing commitments to trying to really drive collaboration and impacts at scale. So this webinar, if you were at our last year one, it's less about pushing out a lot of resources, but it's really about building trust and working towards that greater collaboration, although we still will have some resources. So we're going to dive into one of the longest sessions in the first day was really about how do we think about the role of the challenge and the role of all of us in sustaining farmers throughout the market volatility that we're currently in. And as I mentioned, our first, our theme for the meeting was the time is now. So people might say, well, why now? And this is a slide that is drawn from a report that we published a couple of years ago, saying we still need to be able to meet future demand for coffee. We know that consumption is growing, especially as China and India develop a greater taste for coffee. So we might need between 4 and 14 million tons of coffee per year. If we need to maybe triple production, we need to do that on the existing lands. And if we are not able to do that, we could be driving habitat loss, forest loss, environmental degradation in these places. And at the same time, we have, volatile markets, aging farmers, climate change, and aging trees. And we have to figure out ways of supporting and sustaining coffee production and coffee communities in light of all of this. So when we think about, what we're seeing in the market side and the supply meet demand, we have an oversupply. What does that do to prices? We're seeing this significant drop over the last, 18 months in terms of where prices are, and, below $1, does not really sustain the industry in the way that we would hope it would. At the same time, we know that climate change is affecting productivity, quality, livelihoods of the farmers working in coffee. And so we feel like we have these kind of long-term impacts on coffee producing communities and our future supply. And that's what we're faced with. And some of this could be thought of as okay, market volatility is kind of always there. It's something that is kind of a short-term thinking. And then the climate change is helping us think longer term. What do we want the coffee sector to look like, and what do we need to be doing longer term to sustain it? And so trying to balance these two can sometimes seem quite difficult. And so one of the things that I did before the all partner meeting was kind of lock myself in a room and try to play this out in my head of what do low prices do in combination with climate change? If you play that out in your head, you can get to potentially a rapid decline in productivity, because the market volatility could lead to farmers leaving coffee, saying this isn't worth it, I'm not making money. They're not reinvesting in their farms. They might be migrating into cities to have better opportunities. They might be cutting their investments in labor, good practices around labor, since that's such a high amount, relatively high proportion of their cost of production. And it could also lead to poor environmental practices as farmers cut costs or plant more coffee to try and actually, make more money. Or they could transition to a non-tree crop if they were to cut out all their coffee and transition to another crop that wasn't a shade crop or a tree crop. We see additional greenhouse gas emissions. So all those things could be playing out as we speak, and they probably are starting to. In climate change, you have those longer term impacts, but they're somewhat similar, where you have maybe farmers leaving coffee, the decreased productivity, the migrant labor, farmers moving to higher altitudes, which are usually where there's remaining forests, and the potential need to change production techniques and processing techniques as water becomes more scarce. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do sustainability investments work within this context? Are our sustainability investments sufficient to stabilize production and coffee communities in light of these challenges? And if they're not, then we would see kind of this rapid decline. We also were looking at kind of different market trends and production trends through 2050 and trying to figure out what does that tell us about what we need to do. And so at SCA next month, there'll be a session by David Browning from Enveritas about, do we really have 25 million coffee farmers, or is it more about 10 million coffee farmers? Is the number of coffee farmers declining? Is that good or bad? Some people might say it's good, some people might say it's bad. There might be consolidation happening. But there is a general loss of knowledge around coffee farming that could happen as more farmers leave coffee. We also know that we could be seeing a change in the average farm size. We don't know what that's really going to look like. It's going to depend on, do smallholders stay in coffee? Do they not? Is there consolidation? And there are things that we can do to influence that. So that's why these dotted lines are not clear. It's depending on what actions we take, we could see different scenarios play out. the land suitable for coffee, all the climate models show that we're going to see a decline. We're already seeing a decline, but it'll really hit hard in 2030. And we will need to do investments in adaptation for coffee to stabilize production or even to grow it over time. But we also know, like I said earlier, that demand is increasing. And we know that the commodity prices are quite volatile, and it's never clear like where those are going to go. It'd be great if we could figure all this out in one nice clean graph, but we know it's really hard to do. That would take tremendous scientific prowess, and but this is what we're trying to control for, and not just us from the industry side, but the farmers themselves are trying to figure out what do I do to sustain my livelihood in light of all of these changes. And so the big question becomes like, can coffee drive economic development? Is it sufficient? And so, some of the key challenges for that are generally our supply structure. Are farms small? Do they have sufficient land to support a family throughout the year? If not, what do we need to do as a community, as a sector about that? On the productivity and quality side, we know that coffee trees are aging. We know that there's diseases, there's pests, and there's lower productivity and quality as a result. We have to invest in improving that, like many of us are already doing. The market structures currently just don't ensure that farm gate prices stay above the cost of production. So what can we do to help stabilize that? And then, of course, we're producing coffee in places that have tremendous amounts of unrest, crisis migration, potentially poor governance, poor enforcement, poor service provision. And so, what's the role of the coffee sector in supporting that? And right now we're doing quite a bit to support good governance in these coffee communities. But it drives us to ask the question, and this is what we are asking people to sit around tables and really discuss, is are we making the right investments? And do we need to rethink the types of investments we're making, given that this is kind of the scenario that we're living in now? And we want to make sure that as we get through this crisis, we're more prepared for any future crisis that might hit. And so then we're thinking about what are the potential impacts of major market disruptions, and using the sustainability framework as a mechanism to think through this. Okay, if you're not trying to sustain supply, what do farm gate prices do? They tend to lower supply. What does climate change do? They can tend to lower supply if we don't invest in the right things. So we kind of played this out in our heads and use that as a stepping off point into a broader discussion or table discussions at the meeting. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it's just like it's a mechanism to help us think better about this. And so we've been working with the advisory council and with many of you to think through like what's the right role of the challenge in working through the market volatility and thinking about farmer profitability. And we have kind of a three-pronged approach where we would work with Parker and those of you in the sourcing network to develop and push out resources and tools that help people make good decisions about how they invest in their supply chains, what they do to start conversations about farmer profitability, farm gate pricing, what you can do. And Parker will show you a little bit more about one of the initial outputs that we developed just in time for the all partner meeting. But we've also had discussions around cost of production benchmarks that people could use and those types of tools and resources. We also were thinking through, we developed a sustainability framework a few years ago, and we didn't have kind of farmer profitability front and center in that. So we worked on revitalizing that and developing new visuals to try and show the role of farmer profitability in that. And then also working with some of the partners in the challenge to support their initiatives and their multi-stakeholder processes in terms of engagement. But then also one of the things that came out of the advisory council meeting recently was we can also make sure that people understand what those other initiatives are, what they're doing, and how to engage with them. So trying to develop, one-pagers about, these are the types of dialogues that are happening. This is how you can get involved. So be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks, months. And this is just a bigger version of what you saw on the sustainability framework side in terms of, how do we think about farmer profitability in light of the compass points and the intervention pathways that are in the sustainability framework. And we know that, it's a function, you can strengthen market demand, but that farm gate price really matters to determine profitability. But if you're working on that sustaining supply and providing technical assistance, renovation, et cetera, we also need to think about what's the productivity, what's the cost of production, and those things together will determine the profitability. And so just trying to think about different ways to show this and to push it out via our website and our materials. And so what we were able to do at the meeting was have discussion tables that looked at the framework, that looked at the role of coffee in driving diversification for farmers to try and sustain and balance their needs in terms of their income over the course of a year. And then the final one was on, and I'm just like blanking on what the final table was. But there was a third table that was talking about another key issue on here, and it will come back to me later. So in the past year, just with that, in terms of like our framing, even though like we are in this really kind of dire, crisis in terms of what farmers are experiencing, the Sustainable Coffee Challenge has been growing, and I think it's part and parcel in terms of when we have these kind of crises and you have these big sustainability challenges, people are looking for ways to collaborate and find solutions together. So we're just going to go quickly through kind of what our past year has looked like. We have about 116 partners now in the challenge, and we still have a few spots here. So if you're on the webinar wanting to learn more about the challenge, there's room for you. We will always find room for new partners to engage. The past year marked continued growth for the challenge. We had the 116 partners, 14 of those were new. We've saw more and more partners making commitments, and about 72 commitments in the hub today. And Valerie's going to talk about what those commitments are and what they look like. We're continuing to increase our web traffic, and our newsletter subscribers are almost at the 500 level, which is about 100 more than they were last year. So we're starting to reach more and more partners. You can see the list of new partners since April of last year, and they range from like big brands to local organizations, to traders, to a regional government in Peru, to local export companies as well. So just lots of diversity in terms of who has been joining the challenge, and we continue to see interest and growth in terms of people who might be joining in the coming months. We have worked really hard on the Commitments Hub in terms of initiating the reporting on commitments and relaunching the database management systems in the Hub, or the interface that you all have with the Hub, so that it's easier to enter your commitments and to report on them. And then that has all led to this first annual Hub report that Valerie's going to go into. We've also signed an MOU with the International Coffee Organization and released a guide to funding for its members from the government angle. So, we really like these MOUs where we can do something tangible together with our partners and show real value back to together in terms of what we produce for the sector. We've also had tremendous media coverage and our communications campaigns, and these are we do Twitter campaigns, we do, especially around National and International Coffee Days. Our communications team did a tremendous amount of work to get this article in Time Magazine that featured many of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge partners talking about climate change. And we also did a series of blogs that tried to recognize the work that was going on in countries that have joined the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. And so you can see the numbers below, but really it takes all of us to help spread the word about what we're all doing. And then finally, we have really amazing news that Conservation International and the work of the challenge is being recognized by the Coffee Quality Institute. We're receiving the CQI's Merit Award for 2019. we'll accept that award at the SCA luncheon in Boston on April 13th. And if you're interested in sponsoring a table at that, please let us know, and we'll put you in contact with the CQI team, because they're still looking for some table sponsors. It would be so wonderful to be able to stand up there, you know, receive the award and recognize so many of you who have made the challenge into what it is today. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie, who's going to walk us through the Commitments Hub, and I'll drive. She's sitting right next to me, so she can drive the slides. But Valerie, take it away.
Thanks, Bambi. Okay, so I'm just going to take this time to provide a shortened version of what we shared at the All Partner meeting about the Commitments Hub report, which is in draft version. So I'm sure all of you know that in 2016, the Hub was created with the objective to be the single go-to place for stakeholders to publicly state their commitments to sustainability and report on progress over time. And the idea is that by shedding light on commitments made by stakeholders throughout the sector, we can better leverage them to form new partnerships and inspire others to act. I'm sure you've heard me say this before. So it's a transparent space that has a platform backend and a front end that lives on sustaincoffee.org. So in 2017, late 2017, we opened the annual reporting. In 2018, we conducted a Hub platform refresh, and now in 2019, we're working on the first Hub report. So just a quick recap of where we are in the Hub. We have 72 commitments made by 49 actors, and 43 of those are partners in the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, and 8 actors are reporting on progress made against their commitments. So we know that this doesn't represent all of the sustainability efforts in the sector, but it helps give us a sense of what types of initiatives are underway, which geographies that we're targeting, and who is driving that action. Just switching the slide, sorry, 1 second. And this is just a visual representation of the actors that have stated their commitments in the Hub. So you can see a bunch of great logos here, and we're always excited to get more commitments. The first thing that we understood from the report is that a total investment of $523 million has been committed to reach the goals and targets of the 72 commitments in the Hub. Please understand this isn't an annual investment. This is the total investment that spans the years of the Hub's existence. Then we started to see that 31% of commitments are made by roasters, and then 24% are made by those actors who consider themselves other, which includes importers and exporters. And then it goes down the list: retailers, nonprofits, government agencies, etc. Most commitments, 39 of the 72, are global focus, but those actors who selected specific countries, those countries spanned 29 unique places. So I think it's just exciting here to note the 10 in Colombia, 8 commitments in Guatemala, and then 6 commitments in Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Peru. We're also seeing that 40% of commitments will be completed or mature next year. So that's really exciting. And then you'll also notice that 14 were coming of age in 2017 and 2018, but only 2 of those have been reported on and the rest have not. So we're not yet retiring those commitments, with the understanding that actors need a little bit more time to meet their goals. And then we looked at the 72 commitments by the Challenge's sustainability framework and the guiding compass, and we found an overwhelming focus on sustaining supply at 34% and then strengthening market demand at 26%. And then after that, we organized the 72 commitments by the 15 intervention pathways. And I know there's a lot going on the slide here, but most commitments selected sourcing policies. I'm looking at the left-hand side at 15%, and then technical assistance was 14% of commitments, and climate change 12% of commitments. And in the Draft Hub report, you'll soon see an appendix with the table that's on the right-hand side. Then that's just a table representation of this exercise. So we're excited to continue working on this table and the appendix of the report. Also want to note that this past year, the coffee team at CI worked to help align the commitments to the UN SDGs. And you can see here that most commitments focus on SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 2, zero hunger, which also includes sustainable ag, as we all know. And then after that, the responsible consumption and production SDG had 11% of commitments. 72% of the commitments listed metrics. Roasters were the most likely to list metrics. Multi-stakeholder initiatives were the least likely. And sourcing commitments had the highest level of alignment on the metrics that they listed in the hub. We're also working on a visual map of partner synapses or connections. So this is a draft version here. I don't think we quite caught everything, so this will change just a bit. But you can see that there's room to grow to more of an ecosystem as this looks a little bit clustered out. So we'll continue working on this. And just in terms of next steps, we plan to publish the report within the next quarter of this year, and we're exploring on how this report can feed into other coffee industry reports. So reporting is open until April 30th. If you'd like to be included in this inaugural hub report for the commitments hub, please just go into the hub before the 30th and we can add you in. Thanks, Bambi.
Thanks, Valerie. And if you need help with any of that, please just email us and Valerie will help you with that process. We're really excited to have this hub report drafted, and we shared, a version of that in the binder of materials that we pushed out. If you're interested in seeing what that draft looks like, we can also send that out to you. But it really helps us understand kind of what's in there, what's not in there, and as an incentive for getting more and more partners to use the hub. So with that, then we went into a conversation about what it means to be a partner. And this is something that we've been working with the Advisory Council on in terms of taking a look at who are the partners, how active are they, and trying to just categorize them and think about how do we reach out to partners based on their levels of engagement. So Niels is going to talk through that a little bit. So can we unmute Niels and have him take it away?
Sorry, just 1 second.
Niels, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey guys, can you hear me well?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So just I'll run through it since we're running a bit behind schedule, I think. So the partner engagement has been top of mind for our team and the Advisory Council for the last year or so, and we've been super grateful to see the challenge grow in number of partners. So we're at like 150 currently, but obviously a thriving movement only thrives on the level of participation of the partners, and not only by the CI team. So we basically, starting with like a recap on what does it mean to be a partner. So we basically ask partners to engage in 3 ways. So first of all, asking partners to demonstrate their alignment with our vision of making coffee the world's sustainable agricultural product, and we ask partners for providing a logo and a statement of support, and then I think that's really the basic, and then we encourage partners to state a commitment or multiple commitments on the Commitments Hub, and then report progress over time in order to have it feed into the report that we're doing on an annual basis, which Valerie just presented out our first draft. So those are basically the key things we ask, and then we actively encourage people to get more active and engaged where time and resources allow. So particularly through the collective action networks, but then there are a whole host of other ways to actively engage in terms of participating in our events and helping spread the word, and sponsorships, and also develop other opportunities with us to engage in the challenge. I think we can go to the next. So in terms of the levels of engagement, for us to understand that who are actively engaged in the challenge currently among the partners, we basically broke our partners up into 3 categories: the sleeping, the committed, and the active, or the running ones. And the ideas with our activation strategy is really to get and nudge people from that comfortable sleeping position to a more active and running position. Next slide, please. And what it really means, we see and we understand there are quite a few partners out there who might have signed up back in December or early December 2015 or early 2016, and but who we've lost track of, and this can be of multiple reasons. And one, what we often see is some people move jobs, so we lose touch with some companies. So we're currently actively reaching out to some partners who we haven't heard of in a while, just to reestablish the contact and get them on track towards commitments and towards active participation in the action networks. And then we have a whole set of committed partners who have signed up and stated a commitment and do their homework and report progress. And that's fine. We're happy with these partners as well. And these might be partners who don't have the resources and the capacity internally to be on action network calls or travel long distance to be at our meetings. So we respect that and still value their participation through the Commitment Hub. And then we increasingly look for active participation through the networks. The 4 action networks that we just presented on, and then the whole host of other opportunities to engage, and just putting them out there on the slide for people to be aware that you can contribute to our resources like case studies, infographics, and encourage people to really use those resources as well in their day-to-day work. So I'll keep it with that, and just for a reminder, we are internally working on this engagement strategy, so we'll be reaching out to partners who we haven't heard of or who we'd like to see more in our action networks. So don't be surprised if you get an email from our team.
Great, thanks, Niels. So this is something that spurred a long conversation within the all-partner meeting, and people were kind of outing themselves as having not put commitment up on the hub or not being as engaged as they wanted to be. So it led to a great conversation about how we could ensure long-term active engagement of partners. And we're just really grateful for the level of commitment and engagement that we do get from partners, because we know that people do have limitations on their time. And we've been doing a lot more to try and translate materials into other languages. And we just at the all-partner meeting had the Spanish version of our brochure printed and available for partners. So those are the types of things that we're trying to do to increase people's ability to engage based on different constraints. And we've thought about those different constraints as well. So with that, Niels mentioned the action networks, and so we're going to go quickly through some of the achievements, but just as a reminder of how these action networks work, in the first couple of years of running these action networks, we were really focusing on how do we raise awareness about the issue, how do we enable people to find the information and tools that would help them address that issue, how do you make it easier for them to understand what to do, and then how do you kind of show that it actually works and build the business case for doing things through case studies, things like that. So we've put out a lot of information on what are the tools out there, guidance documents, case studies over the past couple of years. And now we're really moving into that place where we're trying to make it better, like fill information gaps, adapt tools, and then actually scale it up and do it more through collective action. And so you can kind of see where each of the networks kind of sits in this process. And what I would say is, like I said earlier, we're kind of in this stage where we can spend a lot of time trying to make things better and fill research gaps, et cetera. But what we're really trying to do is build trust so that people would come around the table, work together to really address some root causes of the key issues that we see in coffee. At last year's SCA meeting in April 2018, we released a whole host of resources. We want to remind you that they are out there. The guidebook's now been translated into French and Spanish for the R&R, Renovation Rehabilitation Network, but all the other things are still out there available for everyone to access. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Parker, and he's going to go through a little bit of an update of where the Sustainable Sourcing Network is and where it's going to go next. So Parker?
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
Great. So as a quick reminder of who the Sourcing Action Network is, we have our mission up on the page right now, and really we're focusing on inspiring transparent sourcing commitments through sharing experience, lessons learned, and approaches, and that's really meant to increase the purchase of sustainable coffee across the supply chain. So really providing a wide range of actors with support as they're looking to make sourcing-based commitments. As you can see, we have a list of the different organizations that are now part of the Sourcing Action Network. And for reference, we've roughly increased membership from somewhere around 35 folks at the beginning of 2018 to closer to 100 now at the beginning of 2019. So there's been a lot of increased engagement and I think excitement and interest from a range of folks in the industry, and that's great. We're excited about it, and that led into some good conversations as part of our gathering last week. Do you want to move over to the next slide? Great. So as part of our, we had about, I think it was like 75 minutes or so together as an action network to discuss about 3 or 4 different issues. First, we took care of a bit of housekeeping and essentially agreed to continue forward with the structure that we have for the network in terms of having broad-based calls and to use that really as a space to review proposals, as well as bring in experts from the outside. And that's just a note to say that really there's a good amount of work that's going to be done by proactive folks within that network on the brainstorming and proposing new resources and initiatives. So that's the format that we'll be using moving forward. Meanwhile, we reviewed the new document that you see on the screen right now, which is titled Supporting Farmers in a Volatile Market. It's focused on providing a range of different actions that roasters and purchasers can take to support farmers who are facing low market prices. It's pretty broad-based in general and really meant to be an introductory measure. And so part of our conversation was focused on whether or not this was a resource that could be of value to the coffee industry and what potential changes could be made to improve it. And the end conclusion was that yes, it is helpful to have a high-level document that covers all of these points, and then an improvement would be to link out to a lot of additional resources. In addition to that topic, we also covered and had a conversation around cost of sustainable production. And Bambi alluded to this earlier, but the idea of working with a group like the ICO to establish benchmarks at a country level that focus on the cost of production side, but maybe is not as in-depth of a study as what you would find from some other organizations that have been working with individual producer organizations to try to identify the cost of production for a single producer. So instead, providing some kind of snapshot at a country level. And do you want to move to the next slide? Great. So final topic that we discussed was an overview of the specialty coffee transaction guide, which was provided by Kim Elena and Meredith Taylor from Counterculture. And that's really a new resource that we're excited about the potential that it presents, but requires a bit more data to be useful at a general level and to a wider portion of the industry. So more will be coming in future calls for the Sourcing Action Network on that topic. Looking forward, we're going to continue working on guidance for implementing sourcing commitments. That includes that cost of production information, so that folks can use that as a reference point, and also focusing on how we can leverage our work at a time of crisis to be able to support coffee farmers. So look forward to a number of additional webinars getting planned out throughout the rest of the year. We'll host a range of guest speakers who are knowledgeable on topics of interest. So if you have any specific topics that you would like to suggest, please feel free to reach out and we can make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Parker. So I'm going to turn it over to Raina, who's going to go through the Renovation Rehabilitation Network.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who are less familiar with the Renovation and Rehabilitation Network, basically the network sets out to increase investments in crop renovation and rehabilitation. So renovation, the removal of old coffee trees and planting of new ones, or rehabilitation, the aggressive pruning, so stumping of old trees. And the way that we are doing that is, one, by distributing knowledge, but in addition to that, creating incentives. So I want to just walk you through a couple of the resources that we've been working on behind the scenes and give you a taste of what some of the conversation at the table was during the all-partner meeting last week. So in line with what the other networks have produced, we put together a pocket guide, so a real high-level overview of the need for renovation and rehabilitation, and then some of the areas for engagement or investment. That's going to be available on the Sustain Coffee website. It's all content that was in the guidebook, but just a repurposing of that content in a much more bite-sized and easy to kind of read through format. We've also been working with the SAFE platform and funds from them to take the guidebook that was released in late 2017 and put it on our Sustain Coffee website. So it's a more interactive format. And in addition to kind of what we were doing on the pocket guide, it's that same kind of thought of taking that substantial document and whittling it down to some of the key messages. So here's just some screenshots from the interactive guidebook that was released online last week. You can go to the sustaincoffee.org site and navigate through that. It has kind of content in those 4 areas and walks you through, what do you need to know? Is R&R right for your supply chain? How could you take action? Where can you learn more? The map of data sheets that provide context within, I think it's 17 of the key coffee origins. We've also worked on a more kind of a practical best practices guide around metrics. So this comes out of a lot of conversations within the network on what are the things that we should be watching at the nursery, the farm, and then at kind of the program level. These practices aren't supposed to be exhaustive. They're supposed to be really thinking through what are like the key aspects, and then as partners are developing R&R programs, you're encouraged to use these, but it's not a mandatory thing from the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. We will be incorporating some of the program level metrics into the Commitments Hub so that we can see how individual efforts ladder up to that 1 billion tree commitment that the network has. So that's also available online, and this is just a snapshot of it. And then on the piece more around the creating incentives, we are working hard to raise funds for an incentive fund. So basically a fund-to-fund from public donors that would match private sector investments in crop renovation or rehabilitation. We have the fortune to work with TechnoServe and USDA, who will be funding the first million, seeding the first million of this fund. And we are aiming for 5 million to get the fund up and running. And then we will continue to fundraise beyond that. But basically, this would be able to be accessed by partners and through a proposal process, and then provided in grants for additional investments in R&R. So just to kind of show you what we're doing next, so we're going to continue to kind of promote that pocket guide and raise funds for those grants, et cetera. And we're also starting a shade catalog for Indonesia, and hoping to find funds to replicate that in other countries. That's going to be together with WCR and the Smithsonian to develop kind of a mirror image catalog to the varietal catalog that would help farmers and agronomists in, well, like I said, starting in Indonesia, identify what shade is best for the environment and for livelihoods, right? So for diversification purposes in the country. And then at our table, we had started talking about what would be best practice guidelines for responsible renovation and rehabilitation that we could help promote or kind of put out there for the industry as they're thinking about R&R. For example, could those include some social or environmental safeguards, et cetera? And so that was where our table went, trying to get to that. And I think there's still some additional work to be done, but we got a first list of that, and which we'll be following up with on calls in the future. So that's it. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to us for the specific materials.
Yeah, working on a lot now to put these new materials up on the website and make sure that they're available to everybody. So the last two networks, we'll go through the labor one. We did update the mission of the labor network over the past year to make it more active. So really it's about enabling the coffee sector to better understand and take concrete collective action to eradicate forced and child labor in coffee and ensure working conditions that enable all workers involved in coffee production to prosper. So really try to make it that concrete collective action really front and center. And again, a large number of partners are engaged actively in this network and continue to try and help improve labor conditions in coffee. Last year, we pushed out a pocket guide for labor, and this year we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what else should have been in that guide that we didn't include at the time. And one of the things was a set of core principles that the coffee sector should stand behind in terms of pushing for good labor practices. And these are based on what's in certifications, what's in other initiatives that are working on good labor practices with other industries or multi-industry programs. And we were able to get this down to 11 principles that you can see here and that are now embedded in that labor guide. We also worked on a sample code of conduct and checklist to look at your code of conduct against those principles, against, a model or a sample code of conduct. And then we've been working quite closely with the National Coffee Association to align their processes with their members that they were going through to address labor issues and develop tools and resources for them, for their members, with what we were doing in the Action Network. So now this new version of the pocket guide and the sample code of conduct and the checklist now aligns with what they're going to push out to their members as well. So we're really pleased with that collaboration with the NCA on this. And that was basically recognizing that most companies might already have a code of conduct. So we're not saying replace it with this. We're just saying you could review your code of conduct with these sections and see kind of how it compares, and do you need to update your code of conduct. Also trying to think about how do you push codes of conduct to look beyond tier 1 suppliers and all the way through to the practices on the ground at the farm level. We're doing much more in the network beyond that in terms of looking at research needs, how do we address core issues, and so a lot of that will continue, and that's a lot of what we discussed at the All Partner meeting. We had Rainforest Alliance do an amazing session looking at, when we have headlines in the news, how do we individually respond to them, and what could we do together to better respond to some of the forced labor, child labor headlines that we see in the news? How do we think through scenarios? So there's a lot more work that we could be doing, and we were able to kind of brainstorm what that might look like So our next steps in that network are to release the updated pocket guide and push that out together with the NCA. We're planning for a potential in-person meeting of the network in June to help us build trust amongst the members for a really difficult issue and figure out how and where do we work together to address key labor issues. And finally, we're going to, one of the things that came out is we have good risk information, or better risk information at a national level, but you're all sourcing coffee from individual communities or subnational levels, and we have poor information there. So how could we work together to do better analyses and get subnational risk analyses of labor conditions assessed, and then how do we push that out so people can make better decisions about where to invest and how to invest and which issues they need to look closer at in their supply chains. So with that, I'll go to the last network, and that's the mapping and monitoring of coffee and forests. This is our smallest network, but we do have great meaningful discussions about how do we better map and monitor coffee and forests and how that's changing over time, especially in light of climate change, but also in light of the commitments that countries are making to reforestation. So it's really trying to identify landscapes that it might be at risk of deforestation from coffee, and also landscapes that have great potential for reforestation via coffee. It's not all the doom and gloom, but it's also what's that positive role that coffee can play in driving reforestation in these landscapes. So we were so fortunate to get a grant from the Walmart Foundation to start some work for coffee mapping and monitoring in Indonesia and Colombia. That work is now just starting up with CIAT, Rainforest Alliance, the Sustainability Consortium, and CI as the core partners, but really reaching out to many of you, different stakeholders in each of those countries to develop a common methodology that we would use to do this, then having workshops to validate that methodology, validate the maps on the ground, identify the landscapes, and develop joint action plans or investment strategies for what we know that we need to do to improve the situation in those core landscapes. So that's something that'll be a 2.5-year scope of work, and we now have a nice kind of 2-page fact sheet that outlines what that scope of work will be. But if you start to hear more about this and want to know more, please reach out to us. But also, if you are actively working on forest and coffee conservation, reforestation in these places, please let us know too, because we want to make sure we're inviting the right people at the relevant workshops and making sure that we're leveraging our collective experience in how we do this. We also, Dora from the team has been working so hard on trying to take our very text-heavy initial country fact sheets on coffee and forest and turning them into something like this that's a little bit more engaging, that says, how many hectares do we have? What's the forest risk or opportunity? What's the production look like? What's production look like in relation to deforestation? And which kind of subnational regions might be at most risk? What does certification look like in this region? So really trying to push out some information on a per country level about what do we know now, and hopefully as we get better information flowing, we'll be able to complement or supplement this with more information about which regions are at risk or which regions are great opportunities and priorities for reforestation. And I would say that reforestation priority setting process was the hardest to get information on for most of these countries. That's something we still want to get and pull into these fact sheets, but it's something we continue to look for the right resources that will enable us to do that. So our next steps in that network, we had a great conversation about, why Colombia, why Indonesia. We were really looking for, data poor environments, data rich environments, and shade, non-shade, really trying to figure out, maybe a more simple environment to map and monitor versus a more difficult environment, and also looking at where the donor and the sector was really interested in doing this. So we know we have a lot of work cut out for us, but we will continue to work on these country summary sheets for other major producing countries. We'll launch this work and explore the potential to have a meeting about this work in Boston during the SCA convention. And then also, we're actively exploring opportunities to use computer learning or artificial intelligence to expedite this mapping process once we have kind of the algorithms and the models developed. And also looking at the role that computer learning or artificial intelligence can play in helping us move from the point data that we have for farms into turning that into polygons and knowing what's coffee and what is actual forest trees. So lots of exciting work to come in that network as well. So just in summary, like our latest outputs are, you just heard us go through those, but here's kind of a summary of what we've been able to achieve. And then in terms of where we're going, just in 2019 in our calendar, we did, before we go straight into like what we're going to do, one of the sessions at the challenge asked people to identify like innovations, and then we had people kind of vote on 2 innovations that they'd like to see the challenge pursue, and one that they actively do not want the challenge to do. So that's where you see these yes and no columns, and you see alignment around consumer communications, the cost of production benchmarking, great alignment around how do we bring the farmer voice in, and the role of traceability and transparency. And then a little bit of back and forth on like coffee origin index and other ideas that we were talking about, and kind of mixed messaging in terms of where we take that or if we take that forward. But you can kind of see how this played out. We want more feedback on this. So if you have strong opinions on any of these, please also let us know. And we'll be thinking about how better to get more of the partners engaged in this process. But looking forward, in terms of the milestones, you see what we've done for today. For the Renovation Rehabilitation Network, it's really around the shade catalog. It's the fundraising for the R&R Fund. It's fundraising for additional shade catalogs. For sourcing, you heard Parker say, we've been working on the cost of production benchmark guidance, a summary of these coffee volatility initiatives, how to engage in those. We've also been working on an aim progress framework for how do you think about developing and implementing sourcing commitments for coffee. And so there'll be a series of meetings, periodic webinars of guest speakers to try and engage more actors, but also to really focus in on some core issues. In labor, we're working together with SCA, Solidaridad, Rainforest Alliance on a return on investment study looking at the relationship between good labor practices and coffee quality. So that's going to be starting up pretty soon. We're continuing to work on the country summary sheets for labor and thinking about this in-person workshop, but also really trying to drive towards what's something we could do collectively in a place or in several places to drive good labor practices forward. The forest and mapping one is really about launching the project, doing the summary sheets, trying to get more case studies of how different actors are experimenting with them and put out. Then we are the hub, how do we understand how much is in the hub, how much is not, and doing more research to try and collect other information on other commitments that are out there that are not currently in the hub and complement the work in that way. And then on the framework side, we are working on a framework brochure, so trying to turn our framework PowerPoint into a nice brochure for the industry, and then continuing to look at the indicators that are in the hub, how that should inform how we align on indicators, within the sector, and what indicators can we pull out now and push into the hub as ways of thinking about common indicators and common reporting, like Raina was doing with the R&R network. So with that, I'm going to go to the last slide, where it's like we also talked about sometimes there's confusion about when the action networks meet. People don't get the invitations, so be on the lookout in the newsletters. Those will tell you when each action network is meeting. But this gives you a general sense of how the networks work and how to contact us. And then just finally, we will be at Boston at the SCA, and a series of events that we're either like speaking at or our partners are speaking at. And this is just a short list of that because we know many of our partners have other sessions as well. But we're really looking forward to that. We're not having side events, but we're doing more lectures this year. And we would mention again that CQI luncheon and the awards ceremony will be on the 13th. And if you're interested in sponsoring a table, please reach out to us and let us know, and we'll put you in contact with the CQI staff. So with that, I know that we're like right at time. I know people may have had questions, but we probably do need to wrap this up. And I'm sorry, we didn't get a chance to do the Q&A, but if you do have questions, please feel free to write to us at scc@conservation.org, and we will get back to you, promptly with responses. But thank you so much to everybody, to Niels, Valerie, Parker, Raina, for speaking on the webinar today, and for all of you for joining us and for your continued support for driving sustainability in the coffee sector. We're just looking forward to continuing this mission and vision that we have to advance on it and to continue to drive this movement forward. So thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thanks so much.